I want to say a few words about my father and why I believe this weekend is so important. But don't worry.
It was the statement that silenced Britain. Just 5 minutes ago, Prince William stood before the press at Windsor Castle and delivered the words the nation had feared to hear. My father, His Majesty the King, continues his brave battle against cancer, but his condition has worsened. The courtyard fell into absolute stillness, as if even the autumn wind refused to move. Inside the castle, beneath chandeliers that had once gleamed for coronations and jubilees, the air was heavy with grief. Aides moved quietly, their footsteps muffled on centuries-old marble. At the heart of the room sat a single glass display case inside. The imperial state crown, its diamonds catching the pale light. Once a symbol of endurance, it now seemed almost fragile, glittering faintly, as though mourning its master. Reporters who had camped outside for days lowered their microphones in shock. The words, "ongoing treatment," had been used before, but this was different. The tone was final. The fight, once private, was now undeniably public. William's voice wavered only once, when he said, "My father's courage has always defined him, but so too has his love for this country." That sentence hit the nation like a bell. Across Britain, flags were lowered, churches opened their doors for prayer, and messages of support flooded the royal family's official pages. Queen Camilla, still unseen for over a week, released a short note thanking the public for their kindness. Yet, behind the courtesy of words, insiders whispered that the family's unity was fracturing under pressure. In that moment, the British monarchy, an institution older than most nations, felt the tremor of mortality. And for the first time since Queen Elizabeth's passing, even the most loyal subjects began to ask a painful question: can the crown survive another loss so soon? Stay with me, because what happened inside Windsor that night, behind those velvet curtains and diamond walls, will reveal a truth about the royal family that no one was meant to hear. To understand the heartbreak of this moment, one must return to the quiet months leading up to it. King Charles's battle with cancer was no secret, yet few realized how fiercely he had fought to continue his royal duties. His illness, first announced with cautious optimism, had gradually become an invisible weight carried beneath tailored suits and polite smiles. For over a year, he insisted on reading state documents every morning, even on the days when his doctors advised complete rest. The crown must never appear weak, he told his aides, a phrase that became both mantra and burden. Behind the glittering facade of Buckingham Palace, life had changed. The once predictable rhythm of royal engagements gave way to uncertainty. Queen Camilla began to withdraw from major public events, citing personal focus, though many suspected the truth was far heavier. She often retreated to the royal library, where the portraits of monarchs past lined the walls in silent judgment. One staff member recalled finding her late at night, tracing her fingers along the spine of a leather-bound book titled The Legacy of the Crown. Meanwhile, Prince William was thrust further into the spotlight. His appearances grew more frequent, his words more deliberate. At first, his role seemed symbolic, standing in for his father at small engagements. But as the king's absences lengthened, William began to carry the tone of leadership. Courtiers whispered that the transition had already begun, even if no one dared name it. Princess Anne, pragmatic and loyal as ever, served as the family's bridge. She managed communication between Charles's medical team and the royal press office, determined to protect both truth and dignity. The palace's inner circle tried to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Every public statement used the same careful phrasing: His Majesty continues to work from home, while avoiding the word that hung unspoken: decline. Yet the evidence grew undeniable. The king's personal physician, Sir Alan Rivers, was spotted entering Windsor twice in a single day, escorted by the Royal Protection Unit. Courtiers described the king as resilient but exhausted, confined mostly to the private apartments overlooking the long walk. What the public did not see were the quiet conversations happening behind closed doors. Senior advisors from the Privy Council began visiting Windsor for consultations on continuity. Drafts of documents were circulated, contingency plans, in case the king could no longer perform constitutional duties. These papers included sensitive clauses on temporary regency, a term so rarely spoken aloud in modern Britain that even seasoned officials found it chilling. And yet, amidst the medical charts and sealed folders, there was still beauty. The king, ever devoted to heritage, insisted that his final months of work focus on conservation. One of his last public appearances was at the Crown Jewels Restoration Initiative, a project aimed at preserving the priceless diamonds and gems that symbolize centuries of monarchy. Standing under the light of the tower's vault, Charles admired the imperial state crown as artisans cleaned it. "It belongs not to me," he said softly, "but to those who believe in what it stands for." No one realized it might be his last unscripted public moment. By early October, those words began to echo like prophecy. The royal household tightened its security and issued a sudden directive. All ceremonial jewels, including Queen Mary's crown, were to be relocated temporarily to Windsor for inventory review. It was standard protocol, officials said. But those who understood royal tradition knew what it meant when the jewels are moved. The transition has begun. Outside Windsor's walls, autumn leaves fell across the cobblestones. The castle's great flag swayed lightly in the cold wind. And somewhere within those ancient halls, history was stirring again quietly, but unmistakably. The monarchy was preparing for another long night, one it had faced before and would face again. The first signs that something was terribly wrong began quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a single hairline crack in a crown that had endured centuries of pressure. A cancelled event here, a delayed audience there, the kind of subtle adjustments that royal watchers learned to notice. But by early October, those cracks had widened into clear distress. It started with the sudden postponement of the king's scheduled address at St. Paul's Cathedral, where he was to unveil a new memorial for veterans. The palace attributed his absence to mild fatigue, yet sources whispered that Charles had suffered a fainting spell during a private briefing just days before. Later that same week, the royal motorcade was spotted leaving Windsor Castle before dawn, headed toward King Edward VII's hospital, the same facility where generations of monarchs had faced their most delicate medical moments. Cameras captured the convoy slipping into London under a thin veil of fog. The images went viral within minutes, and suddenly every news anchor in Britain was asking the same question. Was the king's condition worse than the palace admitted? Inside Windsor, tension rippled through every corridor. Staff moved with nervous precision, aware that even a misplaced word could become tomorrow's headline. According to one insider, the royal doctors had begun running continuous overnight monitoring, a phrase that sent shivers through those who knew what it meant. For the first time since the announcement of his diagnosis, Charles was no longer working from his desk. The emotional weight of the situation began to show on the family's faces. Queen Camilla remained unseen for nearly 10 days, her absence sparking a flood of speculation. Some believed she was by the king's side day and night. Others claimed she was secluded in Raymil House, struggling privately to process what was happening. Meanwhile, Prince William took on an increasingly visible role, representing the monarchy at public events, addressing the nation in carefully chosen words that balanced hope with realism. During a charity gala in Birmingham, William's speech drew national attention. His voice cracked slightly as he said, "My father's strength is what holds us together, but even strength needs rest." It was a subtle acknowledgement that something larger was unfolding, a quiet confession wrapped in formality. For the first time, the public began to see him not just as heir, but as leader in waiting. At the same time, unusual movements began around the Tower of London. Reports emerged that several royal artifacts, including the imperial state crown, the sovereign's orb, and the Cullinan diamonds, had been temporarily withdrawn from display for restoration and inspection. Experts on royal tradition knew that such actions rarely occur without reason. Whenever the jewels move, it signals preparation, sometimes for ceremony, sometimes for crisis. News outlets seized on the symbolism. One broadcaster remarked, "The crown itself seems to be holding its breath." Across the country, people lit candles in windows, a gesture of solidarity that turned city skylines into a sea of flickering gold. Cathedrals held vigils, and the steps of Buckingham Palace became covered in white roses, the same flower once favored by Queen Elizabeth II. In the middle of this, the palace remained silent. The longer the silence stretched, the more it spoke. Even veteran correspondents, normally restrained, began hinting that a major announcement was imminent. Behind closed doors, William was reportedly consulting with senior advisors and medical staff, preparing for the possibility of addressing the nation once again. Social media lit up with theories, sympathy, and sorrow. Hashtags like #Pray for the King, #William Steps Up, and #Crown in Crisis dominated every trending chart. And yet, amid the anxiety, there was also unity. The British people, divided so often by politics, had come together in collective concern. The monarchy, for all its flaws, still represented something bigger than any single person. As this story spread, viewers across the world tuned in from every corner of the globe. From Sydney to Toronto, from Delhi to Cape Town, royal watchers followed every development with bated breath. I'm curious, where are you watching from today? Drop your country or city in the comments below, and let's see how far this story of faith, duty, and family reaches across the world. By October 9th, one final sign emerged. The royal flag at Windsor, usually raised when the king is in residence, was lowered halfway at dusk. There had been no official reason given, but every journalist and every Briton understood its meaning. A transition was coming, and deep inside the castle, under the faint glimmer of chandeliers and the quiet hum of medical machines, Prince William began drafting a statement that would break hearts across the Commonwealth. By the morning of October 10th, 2025, the palace had become a fortress of tension. The outer world saw only the gilded gates of Windsor Castle, but behind them, the air was thick with urgency. The king's condition had declined overnight. Every corridor echoed with the soft tread of doctors, courtiers, and guards who spoke only in whispers. The sense of ceremony that once defined these halls had vanished. In its place was the controlled chaos of crisis. In the king's private apartments, sunlight struggled to filter through the heavy velvet drapes. Monitors glowed faintly beside the royal bed, their rhythmic beeping the only proof that Charles still fought. The scent of antiseptic replaced the usual lavender polish, and the portraits of monarchs past George VI, Victoria, even Elizabeth II seemed to watch in solemn silence. A doctor who had served the family for decades later described the scene as the quietest room in England. That morning, the Royal Household Council convened an emergency meeting inside the green drawing room. At the head of the table sat Prince William, his face pale but composed, flanked by Princess Anne and Queen Camilla. The meeting was not just about medicine, it was about governance. Documents were spread across the table, each bearing the royal seal. Proposed drafts for a temporary regency order, contingency communications, and a briefing titled Continuity of the Crown. William's role, though unofficial, was already decisive. His advisors, many of whom had served his father, looked to him for instruction. Aides later recalled how he spoke softly but firmly. Father would want the work to continue. Every decision weighed on him like lead. He was not acting out of ambition, but out of duty. A duty his grandmother had once warned him is never kind to those who serve it. Anne, practical as always, urged unity. The crown must appear unbroken, she said. Whatever happens, the world must not see fracture. Her words carried the gravity of experience. She had stood beside her mother through the twilight years of Elizabeth's reign. Camilla, seated across from them, was silent for most of the meeting. Her expression was calm, but her eyes betrayed turmoil. When the draft of the Regency order was presented, she looked up sharply. "He hasn't approved this," she said. The silence that followed was devastating. William's only reply, "He signed it last night," hung in the air like a verdict. For Camilla, it was a blow she could not disguise. The signature meant that Charles himself had authorized the delegation of royal duties, an acknowledgement that he might not recover. To her, it felt like the beginning of an ending she had tried to deny. One aide claimed she left the room soon after, whispering, "He promised me we'd face it together." The rest of the council pressed on. Anne reviewed public protocols. The Lord Chamberlain coordinated media contingencies. Every detail was mapped: the announcement, the medical updates, the possible succession language, down to the minute and tone of delivery. The monarchy thrives on choreography, even in crisis. Elsewhere in the castle, quiet but symbolic actions took place. The Royal Collection Trust received orders to move several priceless regalia pieces, among them the imperial state crown, Queen Mary's crown, and the Cullinan diamonds, to a secure vault beneath the castle. Officially, it was framed as preservation during renovation. In truth, it was precaution. One senior curator confided to the Telegraph that it was the first time in over 70 years such items had been relocated simultaneously. It felt, he said, like the crown itself was being placed in waiting. Outside Windsor, the crowd swelled. The media camped along the Long Walk, broadcasting live through the drizzle. Across the world, news outlets replayed William's earlier appearances and dissected every word. Analysts spoke of an unspoken regency, while sympathetic commentators praised the family's dignity. The monarchy, for all its centuries of tradition, was once again being redefined in real time. Back inside, as the day lengthened, the emotional toll deepened. William visited his father briefly, alone. Witnesses said he stood at the bedside for nearly half an hour, saying little. The king, though too weak to speak, reached out and clasped his son's hand. It was a gesture of both farewell and permission. When William left the room, his eyes were red but his posture unbroken. Camilla entered next. Her visit was quieter, more private. She carried with her a small velvet case, reportedly containing the Queen's diamond brooch, the one she had worn on their wedding day. She placed it on the bedside table and whispered something no one else heard. Moments later, she instructed her staff to have the case returned to the royal vault. Meanwhile, Princess Anne prepared for another press briefing. She was the only senior royal willing to face reporters that afternoon, stating simply, "The king remains in stable care. We thank everyone for their prayers." It was deliberately neutral, but her tone, steady and composed, helped calm a nation on the edge of mourning. By evening, Windsor Castle had dimmed to a soft amber glow. Behind its walls, decisions of historic weight had already been made, though the public did not yet know it. The king's physicians remained vigilant. The royal household prepared the official statement for release at dawn. Every person within the palace understood what the coming hours might bring a change. No one was ready to name. And somewhere deep beneath the castle, in the vault where the crown jewels rested, a single shaft of lamplight struck the sovereign's scepter, scattering a prism of light across the stone walls. To some, it was just a reflection. To others, it looked almost like a heartbeat, one that pulsed faintly, refusing to fade. The monarchy waited in silence. Britain held its breath. History was moving again, quietly but inexorably, toward a new dawn. The world awoke on the morning of October 11th, 2025, to the sound of breaking news. At exactly 7:30 a.m., the palace released an official statement confirming that King Charles III had been transferred to King Edward VII's hospital for intensive care, following complications during ongoing treatment. The words were measured, restrained, but their meaning was unmistakable. The king's fight had entered its most perilous stage. For hours, television anchors spoke in hushed tones, their screens filled with the same image: the royal convoy speeding through London, black cars flashing blue lights under a grey sky. The BBC's coverage switched to black and white portraits of Charles as a young prince, standing beside his mother. The caption read simply, "The King's health. A nation holds its breath." At Windsor, Prince William faced the hardest moment of his life. He had known this day was coming, yet nothing could prepare him for its reality. The Privy Council, in an emergency session that morning, urged him to take immediate action. The King's medical team had confirmed that his ability to perform constitutional duties was temporarily suspended. The council presented him with a sealed document signed by Charles just days earlier, the instrument of delegation, granting William full authority to act on his behalf. William stared at the signature for a long time before speaking. "I never wanted this power," he said quietly, "only his recovery." But he signed the acknowledgement, and with that stroke of the pen, assumed the symbolic weight of the crown. At noon, the world saw him emerge from Windsor Castle. His black suit was immaculate, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. The microphones flashed, reporters shouted, yet when he finally spoke, his voice carried the dignity of a monarch and the ache of a son. "His Majesty remains in care," William began. "He has faced every challenge in life, with grace and courage, and we ask the nation to hold him in their hearts. Until he can return to his duties, I will continue his work in service of the crown and the people." It was the kind of statement that could have been delivered by a statesman, yet there was something deeply human in its tone. A brief pause, a tremor in the voice, a look upward before the words, "My father," left his lips. It wasn't politics. It was grief, disguised as duty. The response was instantaneous. News channels called it the moment Britain met its future king. Crowds outside Windsor broke into applause, not for triumph, but for solidarity. A woman in the front row whispered through tears, "He's his mother's son." Across the nation, church bells rang spontaneously, an act of faith and farewell. But inside the palace, the unity the public saw was not as seamless as it appeared. Queen Camilla, after days of silence, demanded clarification on the delegation order. Sources close to her suggested she felt blindsided. The reality of William's ascension, even as temporary regent, was something she had never imagined would come while Charles still lived. "He is not gone yet," she was heard saying to aides. "We mustn't let them bury him before he's ready." Her frustration soon reached the press. Several tabloids published leaks about a growing divide within the royal household, implying that Camilla and William were at odds over control of communication and protocol. The palace scrambled to deny the reports, but the damage was done. The public had found a new storyline: the monarch's illness and the invisible struggle for power within Windsor's walls. By evening, the narrative had shifted once again. Satellite images showed royal aircrafts at RAF Northolt, allegedly on standby to transport senior royals should the worst occur. Candlelight vigils erupted spontaneously in cities across the Commonwealth: Toronto, Sydney, Auckland, and even Nairobi. Thousands stood outside British embassies holding Union Jack flags and handwritten signs that read, "For the King, for William, for the Crown." Back in London, the imperial state crown was removed from its display at the Tower and delivered under guard to Windsor for security preservation. Historians immediately drew comparisons to 1952, when a similar transfer preceded Elizabeth II's accession. It wasn't official, but to those who know royal protocol, it was unmistakable. The crown was preparing for transition. As night fell, the palace released one final update: "The king is stable but resting." It was meant to calm the storm. Instead, it only deepened the nation's unease. Inside the king's private suite, the lights glowed dimly. William sat alone, reviewing letters of sympathy from heads of state, his hand resting on the sealed delegation order beside him. Outside his window, the faint reflection of the crown's diamonds shimmered in the glass, a reminder that history was already turning its page. And for the first time, the heir understood what every monarch before him had learned in silence: that the crown's greatest weight is not on the head, but on the heart. The following morning, Britain felt quieter than it had in years. The usual chatter of the capital, the rumble of buses, the swirl of tourists, seemed muted beneath a cloud of collective anxiety. Newspapers lined every street corner with the same headline, their fonts screaming the words no one wanted to believe: "The King's battle reaches critical stage." The monarchy, for all its centuries of endurance, was once again standing on the brink of change. Inside Windsor Castle, the mood was somber but controlled. Every member of the royal household understood the choreography of crisis. Prince William was now leading daily briefings with the Privy Council, his voice steady but weary. One advisor later described him as a man learning to be king before the crown even fits. In each meeting, he reviewed public duties, security updates, and medical bulletins before approving the next round of carefully worded statements to the press. Outside, the reaction was deeply emotional. Citizens from across the United Kingdom gathered outside hospitals, churches, and royal residences, leaving flowers and handwritten prayers. Candles burned through the night at St. George's Chapel, where visitors whispered verses of the national anthem under their breath. On social media, a single message began trending worldwide. For the king, for the crown. But beneath the public unity, cracks were forming behind palace walls. Queen Camilla had retreated once again to her private quarters, her absence now a subject of speculation. Aides insisted she was simply exhausted, yet royal correspondents reported that she had been excluded from several internal strategy meetings. Her allies were furious, calling it a strategic sidelining. For years, Camilla had worked tirelessly to earn her place in public favor. Now, with Charles incapacitated and William commanding public sympathy, she feared that her hard-won acceptance was slipping away. Meanwhile, Princess Anne remained the quiet bridge between duty and emotion. She traveled between Windsor and London daily, ensuring that the king's wishes were respected and his medical privacy preserved. When reporters caught her leaving the hospital, she said only, "My brother is receiving the best possible care. The rest is in God's hands." Her composure steadied the public, just as it had during the Queen's final days. Internationally, the story dominated global headlines. The New York Times described the situation as a royal family tested by fate. In Canada and Australia, commentators revisited debates about the future of the monarchy. Could a crown endure so many transitions within one generation? Yet even skeptics acknowledged the remarkable unity Britain displayed in crisis. Whatever one's views on monarchy, a French journalist observed, you cannot deny the quiet dignity with which this family endures pain. Within the palace, however, William faced decisions that would define his generation. Senior aides urged him to prepare for a possible declaration of regency. Constitutional lawyers were quietly reviewing the Regency Acts of 1937 and 1953, determining how long the monarch's duties could remain delegated before Parliament required formal transfer. It was delicate ground. One misstep could ignite political uproar or seem disrespectful to the king still fighting for his life. For William, the personal toll was immense. In the rare hours of quiet, he often sought refuge in the castle chapel, where he would kneel in silence before the altar. One attendant recalled seeing him place a single photograph on the pew beside him, a candid image of his father, smiling during last year's garden party. He sat there for nearly an hour, the attendant said softly, as if waiting for an answer. By evening, as Windsor's flag fluttered weakly in the cool October breeze, the palace released another statement. His Majesty remains under observation, and the family continues to draw strength from the nation's support. It was a line written for reassurance, yet everyone who read it could feel the unspoken message beneath. The future of the monarchy was already shifting, inch by inch, from father to son. And as night descended once more over the castle, the sound of distant church bells carried across the Thames. Their echoes rose into the darkening sky, solemn yet resolute, as if reminding Britain and the world that though kings may falter, the crown endures. As dusk settled over Windsor, the final light of the day glinted off the imperial state crown, now resting in quiet stillness within its glass chamber. The castle, draped in silence, felt like a living monument to duty and loss. Outside the gates, thousands stood holding candles, their soft glow flickering against the stone walls. For many, it was more than a vigil. It was a farewell not just to a king, but to an era. Inside, Prince William walked slowly through the corridors, the same halls his grandmother once ruled with grace and his father had carried with conviction. In that silence, he realized the truth that every generation of monarchs must face, that the throne is not a prize, but a promise, a duty that demands everything and gives nothing easily in return. His father had carried that weight with dignity. Now, it was finding its way to him. There is a lesson here, not only for kings, but for all of us. Strength is not measured by how loudly we speak or how firmly we stand, but by how gently we bear what cannot be changed. King Charles, even in illness, taught a nation that service continues even when the body fails. And Prince William reminds us that leadership is not inherited by blood alone, it is earned through compassion, patience, and the courage to step forward when the world is watching. Beyond the sorrow and ceremony, this story reflects something timeless: the human heart's ability to endure. Monarchs come and go, but values like perseverance, humility, and love remain unbroken, the true jewels of any crown. If this story touched you, please like this video to show your support for the king and his family. Share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what does this moment mean to you? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next royal update, as the fate of the crown and the heart of Britain stands at a crossroads once again.